Welcome back to eTalk. Now, if you're just joining us today on eTalk, we are looking at the role of IP rights in the fashion business, not just globally, but here in Kenya. And the individual who's been helping me with today's conversation is Lenjo, who is the founder of MYP Legal Studio and who is an IP and fashion law expert. Now, we've explained so much about, the role of IP in the different countries in Kenya as well. You've even talked to us about, the IP system right here in Kenya, Liz. Now, I just want to move into learning more about what are some of the cases you've worked on in your career as a fashion law expert that have really allowed you to understand the role IP plays in the fashion industry in Kenya, to be specific.
So I have helped fashion brands, register their brands, and you see, there's more to just of the brand. You need to understand the market out there. You need to understand the threshold of the trademarkability, investigate the ability of the particular fashion house to get investors. So even issues around how they register their business are very important. Issues around the contracts that they have within their business is very important. There have been instances where fashion clients are getting bought over by bigger companies or holding companies. How do they structure such a deal becomes very important. How they collaborate with fellow designers also is one of the things that we see and we have assisted clients with, because you have two different designers with unique perspectives over how they would work or create something, and then you help them navigate that and how they can have a formal business relationship, right? If it's what we call commission works, a third party has come and said, please create the following for me. How do you help them also secure their the IP rights and any other, and especially commercial rights as well, so that then they gain more despite having sold the intellectual property rights which they had created for a third party, right? So these are some of the issues. If you're registering in another country as well, we are able to sort of assist in that situation. You're preparing, for a fashion week as well. Who are some of the designers who are going to be on that runway? Then we help you sort of protect yourself in terms of any that you create. You have to protect before you showcase to the world, right? Yes. Because otherwise then you're susceptible to copycats. When you're copied, then you lose that originality and that priority and that identity. And then, there have been instances where the original designers have seemed to be the copycats, yet they're the ones who created the work. So, those are some of the briefs we have handled in a nutshell to help fashion design.
And having worked closely with a lot of creatives, or should I say fashion designers, have you come across fashion designers who don't really know their IP rights, and also would you say it's important for these fashion designers to know them if they don't?
I have, actually. Those who do not know, there's some, especially the majority, feel like they do not need intellectual property. And that's because of, the previous example I used. Some of them will say, all these international designers come to Kenya and they're knocked off. So why do I need to register and all these things? But it's because they don't understand how they have, structured their businesses, and that they're able to still stand despite, counterfeits and knockoffs in the market. So it's very important that they understand and then they figure out how to navigate the system. We've seen very interesting cases even internationally in terms of how small designers, let me use the word small for lack of a better term, but smaller businesses going after or going against the big companies and the big brands in the fashion area, in the fashion business, and some of them have won and some of them have lost on a technicality. It's because they didn't register the intellectual property, they didn't have proper contracts, and then because of that premise, then they lose a case, and yet they were the designers, the original designers to begin with. So that's why IP becomes very important. You could fail to register and your business tanks, because the fashion business is highly dependent on the creativity, on the innovations, on these, novel ideas and, the expression of these ideas. So it's very important that they're secured and then you're able to compete in a structured fashion.
Yes. I completely understand what you're saying. Despite there being IP laws in Kenya that, these rights that protect our creators, our fashion designers in Kenya, we've had scenarios where we have foreign, let's say fashion designers steal our styles. For example, there was a point where Kikoy was about to be patented by a UK brand until the government, intervened and made sure that did not happen. Therefore, we have situations where foreign brands are taking our our, let's say, our designs and commercializing them in their own countries. How can we move away from this?
So we have an emerging area of intellectual property called traditional knowledge and cultural expressions. Now, this area is still being developed because it's very tricky. When you look at how Kenya we are as a society, we have had so much that we have shared in between communities. Decide amongst ourselves, what is it that we own? Is there anything that we feel is in the public domain? Because when we start having this conversation about traditional expressions, then we are basically saying community X, community Y have the following issues or they own the following property. So which means that even us as Kenyans, then I would have to take an example from your community, for example, or another community. And yet before this, we have, you sat down and you said, in art and craft, I learned how to do some weaving. They talked predominantly maybe used by the TESO, and then I tweak something here and there and I create something new. Now the problem with traditional knowledge and culture, discussed about the issue of inspiration, and yet for intellectual property to prevail at the end of the day and for people to create more and more needs to take place. So these conversations are yet to happen. A lot of historical research as well has to happen because there are some things we misconceive. We own and yet we do not own. They are a result of either barter trade from the earlier days. They are a result of this kind of community interactions as well. So we have a lot of discussions that need to happen there, despite us having a traditional knowledge act. So I think there we really need to be very prudent. At the same time, for purposes of diplomacy, we have to be very careful. Even the media has to be very careful in terms of how they report some of these intellect. We would not want to expose our people, our property to lack of knowledge, and then that means then are able to say, Kenyans actually don't understand the following. Ooh, loophole. Let's take advantage of that. So it's very important that we are informed in these conversations, and as we are also moving forward in terms of legislation, we are very prudent. As much as we want to be reactionary because we feel foreigners are taking advantage of us, we have to remember about our locals as well. What kind of effect does some of these laws have to our businesses here in Kenya? So it's something that really needs to be approached in a very balanced fashion and with a balanced eye.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that insightful information, Liz. Really appreciate you making time to come here on E-Magazine and give us a complete different perspective on IP rights and laws.